My humble respect to Guru Mahan, Guru Piran Sivasankaran, Guru Piran Neo, fellow Jnanis. Um, this week I'm going to cover chapter 26 of the I God philosophy on thoughts and dreams. Today I'll cover on thoughts. We covered in chapter 23 also some element of thoughts, particularly desires and so on. Today I'm going to talk about a little bit more in detail on thoughts. And then next week I'll talk about dreams. What dreams? Why do we have dreams? And even that we covered a little bit of that the last time, but I want to give you a little bit more in detail on what dreams mean and so on. So this week we'll cover on thoughts with a little bit more. Why do we have certain thoughts? What generates these thoughts? And I'll speak about some of Mahan's own analysis and experiences. So let's look at what thoughts are. We covered this in chapter 23, where thought is a measure of experience. So we as human beings on this earth, we experience this earth through various experiences that we have. And that is measured by thought. And the thought is very important for us. It's the software that the mind has to be able to experience, cognize, and operate in this material world. Without thoughts, we see that the world completely becomes silent. So thought is a measure of experience, and we cover that in chapter 23. More detailed definition of what thought is it's this is a Cambridge dictionary, which says that thought is an act of thinking about or considering something, an idea or an opinion, or maybe a combination or set of ideas on a particular topic or particular concept or subject. So everything that we are talking about thought is about this material world, right? So we need to understand that as a four-dimensional being on this earth, where we have three-dimensional space and time, we experience this three-dimensional universe with time through the measurement of thought. That the thought gets registered in our mind, the mind generates it through the experiences, and it measures those thoughts. Those thoughts are stored in our memory, and sometimes it's not so deep in the memory, so we forget. Sometimes those thoughts are very deep, so when we want something, when we want to retrieve it, it's easier. But sometimes it just shows up for particular reasons or particular environmental conditions or particular circumstances. It shows up because it's deep within our own memory. So whatever it is, thought is actually a measure of experience, and that experience is stored in our mind, in our memory, and we retrieve it, or sometimes it shows up. Why does the thoughts? Again, this is from chapter 23. We covered the thoughts are generated by neurons in the brain. It's an electrical pulse. So whatever we see, cognize, it's converted into electrical pulse. So there's a chemical reactions in the brain. There's important component in our brain, chemicals that we have neurotransmitters that transmit information through the various neurotransmitters, so that there is a passing of information to make sense of that information. They're all electrical pulse, that generates through the neighborhood, like a network, right? So, and we see that the electrical pulse are somewhat like the waves, right? And sometimes the pulse cannot cross from one synapse to the another. We cannot make sense. So this firing of these neurons is what generates the thoughts, right? So very interesting. So we know what drives thoughts, what are the things that creates thoughts, so this is all our experiences that's converted electrical pulse. And one would wonder that there are times that we remember things, but what happens to people who have Alzheimer's or other mental disorders, and you see that the neurotransmitters, there's something missing, or there's a gap in the neurotransmitters, so there's some damage. certain parts of the brain, maybe through accident, through aging process. We see that the information cannot pass through, and maybe people become forgetful. And more serious is that when parts of the brain starts dying, so the neural connectivity starts dissipating, and you see that you can actually see, the patients where the brain starts shrinking, and you see that they can't remember things in the beginning, and then they forget small things, and then that progresses into much more, serious things where they can't remember who they are, their spouse, their family, children. Ultimately, eventually, the brain is unable to pass adequate information that, the other neural motor coordination starts disintegrating. And ultimately, you see that everything shuts down. So you see the thoughts are really important, and that is why, keeping your mind active is very important. That means the process of generating thoughts, complex thoughts, all these are very important to keep that neurons firing. If you don't use it, you lose it, right? So part of this process is actually about making sure we eat healthily, we have good sleep. Sleep is very important for the rejuvenation of the brain and the neural pathways and so on. So if you're not getting enough sleep, then you've got to sort that out. The other aspect that actually helps us generate thoughts, and helps us remember is actually mindfulness or meditation. Of course, exercise also is very important. Mindfulness and meditation is also very critical to keep that neural pathway fully connected. As we age, we should be doing a lot more mental activities, a lot more activities that will stimulate our brains. So reading, reflecting, deep, complex ideas, thoughts, playing chess, playing mahjong, all those things keeps our brain active. Right? So these thoughts are really, really a core part of human beings. Other animals too have thoughts and so on. But, the human brain is so complex that, it is able to generate thoughts, and the thoughts to change even their own, life and things around them. So the kind of thoughts that we generate, what kind of thoughts that we generate? We have subconscious thoughts. Mahan speaks about subconscious thoughts. We are not aware of it, but nature's built that in us, right? The thought of, hunger, the thought of, when we come in front of a big, predator, we suddenly fear comes in, the thought of fear, all those things. So these are inbuilt by nature. So nature itself has given us this software, this thought, to be able to prolong, our existence, avoid harm, avoid being eaten by other animals or killed by other animals. So nature has given us that, that inner software to be able to, use our mind and our thought very carefully to ensure that we exist and improve our quality of life. So if you see, this, when human beings first, particularly Homo sapiens, they were much more smaller. The animals were very big. They were often eaten by animals or maimed by animals. So the fear was there. And the fear, got them together to create new innovative strategies to bring down bigger animals. Like fire, they work together to bring down big, woolly mammoths down. And they saw that, they were able to generate really creative thoughts to be able to withstand prey, the predators, withstand, climate, a whole range of things. But it comes deep down from within ourselves, right? So nature has built this software in us. We also have transitory thoughts that come, fleeting thoughts, and then they go. And sometimes we don't remember it. Right? So this is also part of nature's way of keeping the mind active. One is that the first kind of thoughts that are generated is to protect ourselves, ensure existence, and so on, survival. These transitory thoughts are that sometimes when the mind shuts down, the neural pathway nature is built in us that it continuously fires things. So we start thinking about transitory thoughts that come in and go. So it's a way of keeping the brain active, keeping the neural pathway active, right? So and so sometimes you dream, you know all kinds of things that happens in your mind, and then after that you forget. And so so know that it is also nature that is keeping your brain neural activity active. The other one is sometimes we get in that process of these transitory thoughts, we get a lot of unnecessary thoughts, really unfruitful, impossible things that, the brain concords, and sometimes you say, this is not possible. But you still get that very vivid, very interesting thoughts. And sometimes, what may be unnecessary, impossible thoughts, when you think deeply, you see that what was impossible, you can actually translate that. So I give you an example. For thousands of years, human beings were thinking about the moon, right? Wow, the moon looks so beautiful. The moon gives us this. The moon is very important, but it's impossible for human beings to go and land on the moon, right? So for hundreds and thousands of years, it is impossible. But the dream was there to land a man on the moon. The thoughts became very lofty. The thoughts pushed the boundaries of the knowledge that is needed to be able to make that happen. Right? So what was a thought of impossibility became possible. Today we have human beings landing on the moon. We have probes landing on the moon. We have human probes landing on the different planetary systems, and so on. So what was sometimes unnecessary, vivid, impossible thoughts may be impossible, but some impossible thoughts can be possible if the thought that you generated first starts pushing you in the direction of making it happen, right? Then you also have a lot of negative thoughts. There are thoughts that, makes that human mind shrunken. This is upsetting thoughts, fear, anxiety, anger. These are part and parcel of nature. Nature's built this in our mind so that there's this discomfort, uneasiness, and that uneasiness must push us away from our comfort zone, make us more exploratory, make us more creative, make us more innovative. So some of the thoughts will ultimately lead to something positive, like, things such as really bad, you feel upset. That's, so what am I going to do to make that change? So when they take the step, you see that, uh, it's a foundation to some of the, thoughts that was impossible, negative, fear, to push human beings to the brink of that knowledge to overcome that negativity. So this is one hand. The other hand is actually when negative thoughts become overwhelming, it sometimes cripples people, cripples their mind. It makes them impossible for them to move forward. Sometimes negative thoughts leads to various mental disorders, right? Things such as depression, and a whole range of other. So there are thoughts that our mind generates. Some of it is, got to do with our DNA. Sometimes, a lot of it is of neural connectivity. So some of our ancestral things are imprinted. So we call it nature. But there is also nurture, what we nurture also has an influence on the kind of thoughts that we generate. So you see that in homes and parents, where they're always negative, critical, there's a lot of anger, putting people down. You see that slowly, the children also imbibe those values. So there are thoughts that make our mind shrunken. Shrunken here means make us less illuminated. But there are also positive thoughts that, inspirational thoughts can do, no problem, thoughts that make us happy and joyful, right? Making our mind expand continuously. So there is a continuous feedback loop. But the question one needs to ask is that why do I have negative thoughts? Why do I have positive thoughts? What is in it that I'm doing that I'm generating positivity? And what is it that I'm doing that I feel depressed, I feel anger, I feel down? So this is something that as human beings, we have to introspect, contemplate, reflect, and meditate. So when we know, okay, this thought is not a nice thought, I thought badly about this person, or I spoke badly about someone, a situation, that thought was not a great, how do I, transform that? Or sometimes you feel so inspired, you get inspirational thoughts, right? And, you feel on top of the world. Why do I get that? Where is this coming from? So when we do this, we see that slowly the thoughts starts changing. It starts changing the chemistry of our mind. That which generates the thought. Ultimately, the mind evolves, become enlightened, and you see that percolates enlightening thoughts, inspirational thoughts that reinforce. In that same way, we see that we need to understand why do we have negative thoughts? What essentially generates this? Why do we feel anger? Why do I feel fear? Some of it is we inherit from our ancestors through our DNA, but how do we overcome this challenge? And that is more important. How do we, in spite of these challenges, have a more developmental thought process that helps us? Okay, I see a challenge, I have an anger problem. How do I solve the anger problem? Yeah, I have a problem with envy. What do I need to do to overcome this envy? Right? So all this, and slowly you see that the drunkenness starts expanding. Similarly, when we feel inspired, we ask the question, why do I feel inspired, right? What's driving me? And you see that it comes back to people, your spiritual compass. We all have a spiritual compass. Some know how to use it, some don't know how to use it. Some completely destroy the spiritual compass, replace it with something else. So that nurturing that spiritual compass is so important that it gives us the illumination of the mind that is the generator of the thoughts. Right? So when we get to the core of that, we see that the kind of thoughts that we generate depends very much on the effort that we put in to really understand the processes of the mind, that inner resources in us. Most people have a mind. They use their mind, but they don't know what the mind is and why the mind generates, specific thoughts. So this is what Mahan speaks about, and he talks about many examples of how the thought processes helped him overcome many challenges. The thought processes helped him discover many things. The thought of divinity so close to him, he was able to discover the divinity. So here it is that, and of course there are thoughts that we have silence, absolute silence. Nothing in the material world impacts us. The winds of materiality doesn't touch the mind. And I like this quote by Rumi. He says that your thoughts are the veil on the face of the moon. I mean, it kind of blocks you from seeing completely the moon, that illuminator. The moon is your heart, the seat of our soul, right? And those thoughts cover our heart. So the thought actually prevents us from seeing who we are. So he says, let them go and let them fall into the water so that you are able to discover your true self. So in that same way, I spoke about positive thoughts, negative thoughts that gives us sukhas and the dukkhas. Mahan and other great saints say that, great, all this you understand, but know that all this is happening on a mind that is absolutely quiet and divine. So you want to discover God and the divinity, you slowly divinize everything until the thought falls back to that mind, which is the mirror of the soul. And ultimately, you see that the mind that generates the thoughts resonates the same frequency as the soul that is formless, dimensionless, infinite, inspirational. And you see that the mind becomes inoculated, vaccinated by the qualities of the soul force, which is divine. The mind becomes pristine, divine, lofty, inspirational, expansionary, and universal. So we see this, and the process of dropping this, thoughts of sukha and dukkha is the process of meditation, the process of yoga to be in union with. So Rumi speaks about this. I love this quote. The mind is not a vessel to be filled with things, but a fire to be kindled. The fire is kindled by the soul force, the Dava. When the mind is fired by this divine illuminator, the mind realizes that it is that illuminator. See, so our mind should not be filling up information, but actually a fire to lit so that it goes on to discover who the true person is, what this universe is, what God is, and the interrelationship between the self, the universe, and this universal God. So this is what that mind is, to generate lofty thoughts, inspirational thoughts, a fire that lights this flames of wisdom, flames of illumination. And this is what Plutarch is talking about. Those who meditate intensively will see amazing ideas that come through. So this leads me to the next one, which is actually about smart mindset. How do we generate this positive, exploratory, amazing discovery of who we are? And that requires a smart mindset. How do we nurture our mind to be smart? What do I mean by smart? It's seamlessly integrated. That means the mind doesn't see separation. It sees itself as one with that soul or the God force, and everything else it sees in this universe is part and parcel of the Creator. The creations are part of the Creator, which is also emanating from you. So the seamlessly integrated, you don't see separation between you and others, your family and other family. You see everybody as one. The second aspect of the generating that lofty thoughts is that moral, being ethical and disciplined. Know the boundaries that will veer you away from that path of spirituality, in the path of swinging between sukha and dukkha, to the path of samatva, and the path of, spiritual enlightenment. And learning to enlighten everything. So if we did that, we see that our mind becomes agile. We're able to then adapt to any circumstances, any situations, any environment. Because the mind is seamlessly integrated, it's disciplined, it knows its principles, that this too shall pass. The only permanent thing is that substratum within us. So the mind becomes agile, no problem, No conflict is big. No challenge is as big as the Titanic. Even the Titanic was sunk and completely absorbed and dissolved. So this is what the mind that is agile is able to generate, put two thoughts together into one and get a combination of amazing thoughts, right? The next thing is that the mind, it's agile It's adaptable, but it's also responsive. When change happens, it is able to not only adapt to the change, but lead the change, right? And that leads beautifully to transformation, what I call transformative. So you see that a mind that is inoculated by the soul force, that means the mind that is always in a state of oneness through meditation, introspection, contemplation, reflection, you see that the mind carries the characteristics of the soul force, which is seamlessly integrated, moral, agile, responsive, and transformative. And you see that every thought that you generate becomes a smart thought. It sees a broader picture, tells you what's the right thing to do. It's very agile, it's able to adapt to different situations, transformative and responsive, helping you to respond to things, and finally, the thoughts that transform us, take us to the great, higher height, and as we go higher, we're able to see a more broader perspective of the things that are, below us or things that we can cognize. And this is what that smart mindset is, to generate thoughts that are lofty, inspirational, and universal. And here Swamiji gives examples of how the thoughts that he had, the kind of things that he started thinking about at a very early age, at the age of 11 years old, and continuously relentlessly thinking about God realization, being one with God, understanding this universe. And slowly, it transformed an ordinary person like Mahan into an extraordinary person as a Jnanavalal Paranjyothi Mahan. We all have the capacity and capability to do it if we put in the effort. Santosha.